I never thought a simple FaceTime call could change everything. I was sitting in my room scrolling through my phone, half expecting my brother to just check in like usual. But this time it was different. When his name popped up on the screen, I thought, great, he just wants to show me his new game or something. I had no idea that answering that call would make me an accidental witness to something I could never unsee. The moment I picked up, I realized something was off. Instead of the usual cheerful, "Hey, what's up?" I was met with muffled voices, whispers, and that weird kind of tension that makes your stomach twist. I glanced at my screen and froze. My brother had somehow called me while our entire family was gathered in the living room, without him even noticing. And what I heard next made my heart pound like crazy. It started with a quiet conversation, almost inaudible, but then little pieces began to emerge. Words like inheritance, she won't even know, and it's already planned floated across the screen. I blinked, convinced I was imagining things. But no, the voices were real, and they were discussing me. Well, me indirectly, and my future. The people I trusted the most were talking about taking what was supposed to be mine. I didn't move. I couldn't. My mind was racing. On the screen, I saw my parents leaning in closer to each other, their faces serious, almost conspiratorial. My cousins were there too, whispering among themselves, their eyes darting toward the corners of the room as if making sure nobody else could hear. It was surreal. I had known that family drama existed, of course, but nothing like this. Nothing this direct, this calculated. My brother, completely oblivious to the fact that I was watching, was pacing around the house, talking to someone on speaker. And me? I was frozen, my hand hovering over the end call button, afraid that clicking it might erase the only proof I had of what was happening. I could hear their laughter, the kind of fake, too bright laughter that people use to hide something ugly. My stomach churned as I realized I was hearing plans, and those plans involved me being left out, or worse. I thought about what I should do. Should I confront them right away? Should I record this for later? Every option made me feel trapped. The more I listened, the more details slipped through. They were talking about timing, about manipulating situations, about ensuring I wouldn't even suspect until it was too late. My head was spinning. The family I had trusted all my life suddenly seemed like strangers plotting behind my back. And then, just when I thought I couldn't process anymore, a name was mentioned. My name.
Clear as day.
I sat there, heart hammering, as the words were thrown around like pieces of a plan I had no part in shaping. I realized this wasn't just idle chatter or family gossip. This was deliberate, and it was targeted. I felt a wave of disbelief, anger, and fear all at once. How could people who had promised to protect me, who had promised love and loyalty, plan something like this without ever letting me know? I tried to steady my breathing, telling myself I must be mishearing things. Maybe it wasn't really about me. Maybe I was overreacting. But then I heard the mention of documents, accounts, and numbers, things I knew were connected to my inheritance. My stomach dropped, and my hands started to shake. I had spent years thinking I understood my family, that I could trust them. But now, everything felt like it was unraveling in front of me. I glanced at my brother again. He was still talking, completely unaware of the chaos happening on the other end. If he had noticed, maybe things would have stopped. Maybe I wouldn't have been caught in this storm of deceit. But as it was, I had no choice but to listen, to piece together their plans in real time. And the more I listened, the more I realized that this wasn't just a conversation. This was a blueprint, a plan that, if executed, could change everything about my life. I could feel the tension building, the kind that makes your chest tight and your palms sweat. My mind raced through all the what-ifs. What if they find out I heard? What if they confront me? What if I try to fight back and it backfires? I felt powerless, yet a part of me knew I couldn't just ignore it. I had to figure out my next move carefully. Every word I heard on that accidental FaceTime call became a piece of a puzzle I never wanted to see, but now couldn't unsee. And then it hit me. What if my brother had accidentally done me a favor? Without even realizing it, he had handed me the key to uncovering everything. This accidental call was my chance, my only chance, to understand the truth before it was too late. But as I stared at the screen, the laughter and whispers continuing in the background, I realized one thing. I couldn't tell anyone yet. Not a friend, not a cousin, not even my brother. Because if the wrong person found out that I had been listening, well, I didn't even want to imagine that scenario. My heart was racing, and I couldn't stop thinking about what would happen next. The voices on the other end of the call were calm now, plotting in a way that made everything feel inevitable. I felt a mixture of fear and determination. I knew I had to stay quiet for now, gather evidence, and plan my next move. But the tension in that room was palpable, even through the screen. And every second I stayed connected, every word I overheard, drew me deeper into a story I wasn't sure I wanted to be part of. But now, there was no turning back. I leaned closer to my phone, my eyes locked on the screen. I had to catch every detail, memorize every expression, every nuance of their voices. And then, just as I was beginning to feel like I could make sense of it all, the call ended. My brother had somehow hung up, unaware of the storm he had just unleashed in my life. My screen went black, but the images, the voices, and the plans, they stayed in my mind. And I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. I sat there in silence, staring at the black screen, my heart still racing. I had seen the cracks in my family, the hidden plans, the whispers of betrayal. And now I had to decide, do I confront them? Do I expose them? Or do I play along and wait for the right moment? I didn't know. All I knew was that this accidental FaceTime had opened a door I could never close, and whatever happened next would change my life forever. And that's when I realized I wasn't just an accidental witness. I was now part of the story, and the story was far from over. After the call ended, I couldn't move. My phone felt heavy in my hands, like it carried all the secrets of that room with it. I kept thinking about the words I had heard, the way my family had leaned in closer, their voices hushed but tense. I had always known that my family had secrets, little disagreements and disagreements over money and property, but I never imagined it could go this far. To hear them openly talking about inheritance, about plans that excluded me, it shook something deep inside me. I sank onto my bed, trying to make sense of everything. I started thinking about my family's history, the patterns I had ignored for so long. My parents had always been close, but there were little cracks I had never paid attention to. My cousins had always been competitive, but I thought it was just sibling-like rivalry, harmless teasing. Now, it all seemed like part of a bigger picture, a pattern of careful planning I had somehow missed. The thought made me shiver. It wasn't just the words that hit me, it was the way they said them. There was a kind of calm certainty, the way someone talks when they know the plan will work, when nothing can go wrong. I could feel the air of calculation even through my phone screen. That sense of control, that quiet confidence, made me feel small, like I was standing outside a room I had no business peeking into, but now I had, and there was no turning back. I remembered the first time I noticed odd things in my family. It was years ago, a small disagreement over money when I was just a teenager. At the time, I had brushed it off, thinking adults sometimes argued. But now, as I replayed every moment in my mind, I realized there were warning signs I had ignored. Secretive conversations in the kitchen, whispered phone calls that abruptly ended when I walked by, strange smiles exchanged when I wasn't looking. All of it made sense now. They had been careful, patient, and I had never noticed. I thought about my brother. Poor kid had no idea what he'd done. If he had realized he'd accidentally shown me everything, he would have probably panicked. But in his usual way, he was completely innocent in all of this. He didn't even know he was the key that unlocked the truth. And I couldn't tell him not yet. He was loyal, yes, but sometimes too trusting, too naive. If he accidentally let something slip, I could lose any advantage I now had. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how delicate everything was. One wrong move, one word spoken at the wrong time, and all of this could explode into chaos. And yet, I felt a strange kind of determination rising inside me. I couldn't just let them plan in secret while I sat on the sidelines. I had to figure out what they were thinking, what they were plotting, and how far they were willing to go. I started going over the details I remembered from the call. They had mentioned accounts, properties, even legal documents. That told me one thing: they weren't just talking about casual plans. They were making moves that could have real consequences for me. I had to understand the full picture before taking action, or I risked exposing myself without knowing what I was walking into. Then I thought about the people involved. My parents, who I had trusted all my life, seemed different in that moment. Calculating, secretive, maybe even cold. My cousins, who had always been competitive, were clearly willing to follow along with the plan, no questions asked. And my brother, clueless and unsuspecting, was the only one I could count on to be honest. It was strange to realize that one accidental FaceTime had shifted my perspective on everyone. I didn't know who I could trust anymore, and that realization was terrifying. I spent the rest of the day pacing around my room, going over every possible scenario in my head. Could I confront them directly? That felt impossible. They were too careful, too confident, and I was not ready to face that head-on. Could I gather evidence quietly, maybe record conversations, or watch for any hints in the coming days? That seemed safer, but it would take time, and I had no idea how patient I could be before something slipped. I also had to think about the implications beyond money. This wasn't just about inheritance. It was about loyalty, trust, and family. It was about realizing that people you love might not always have your best interests at heart. That thought hurt the most. I had spent my entire life believing in the safety of my family, in their love and care. But now, that belief was fractured. I felt like I was standing on a tightrope, balancing between suspicion and reality, and one wrong step could make me fall completely. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept imagining that living room, their faces, the whispers, the careful glances, and the laughter that didn't reach their eyes. Every time I closed my eyes, I could hear the words again. She won't even know. It's already planned. The phrase, "it's already planned," kept echoing in my mind, as if it were a warning I couldn't ignore. How long had this been going on? How long had I been oblivious to their plans? And, most importantly, what would happen next? By morning, I realized that I had to be smart. I couldn't act on impulse. I had to observe, understand, and wait for the right moment. My brother's accidental call had given me an advantage I never asked for, and I had to use it wisely. Every move I made now would be crucial. I felt like I was entering a game I hadn't chosen to play, and yet I had no choice but to keep going. I started paying attention to small details, noticing the way my parents spoke to each other, the way my cousins exchanged glances. Even in casual conversations, I tried to catch hints, little clues that might tell me what they were planning. Every laugh, every pause, every innocent comment could be part of something bigger. The realization made me hyper-aware, like I was walking through a house full of secrets where every shadow hid a potential threat. And then there was the fear, real, gnawing fear. Not just fear of losing what was rightfully mine, but fear of being wrong, of misinterpreting, of making a mistake that could make things worse. I couldn't shake it. I knew that what I had stumbled upon was dangerous, and I couldn't underestimate it. Yet, despite the fear, there was also a strange thrill, a sense that I was now in control of something hidden, something no one else knew. As the days passed, I kept thinking about that accidental FaceTime. Every time I replayed it in my head, I noticed more details I hadn't caught before. The way someone's hand moved, the slight hesitation in a voice, the words almost swallowed by a cough. Every little thing seemed important. And every time I thought I understood, a new question popped up. What exactly were they planning? How far would they go? And could I stop it before it was too late? I realized I was living in two worlds at once. The world I had known, the world of family dinners and laughter, and the world I had just discovered, full of secrets and hidden intentions. It was exhausting, confusing, and scary. And yet, I couldn't step away. I had to see it through, no matter how hard it got. The story had begun, and I was now a part of it, whether I wanted to be or not. And just as I started to settle into this new reality, I got a text from my brother. It was completely innocent, a casual, "Hey, did you see the game last night?" But my mind raced. Could he have noticed something? Could someone else have realized I knew too much? I didn't respond immediately. I stared at the message, my heart beating faster than ever, realizing that everything was about to get more complicated. I knew one thing for certain. The accidental FaceTime was only the beginning. What I had seen, what I had heard, and what I now suspected would set off a chain of events that could change everything about my life. And no matter what I did next, there was no going back. The days after that accidental FaceTime felt like walking through a maze with invisible walls. Every interaction, every glance, every word from my family felt loaded, like it had a hidden meaning I was only beginning to decode. I tried to act normal, but the truth was, nothing felt normal anymore. Even my brother, the one person I trusted most, seemed like he was moving through a world I no longer fully understood. I kept wondering if he would accidentally reveal something else, or if I'd uncover more by just observing quietly. I started replaying the conversation in my head again, trying to catch details I had missed the first time. There was a phrase my father used that I couldn't get out of my mind. Timing is everything. My father had always been careful with his words, but this time it felt like a warning, or a plan in motion. I thought about what he meant. Timing for what? What exactly were they planning, and how long had this been going on? It wasn't just the adults who worried me. My cousins were acting differently, too. There was a subtle tension in their usual teasing, a quiet competitiveness I had never noticed before. It wasn't playful anymore. Every joke, every smirk seemed like a test, like they were gauging how much I knew or how much I suspected. I realized the subplots in this family drama were everywhere. It wasn't just about money. It was about power, influence, and control. And somehow I was in the middle of all of it. I found myself thinking about my brother constantly. Poor kid had no idea the chaos he'd accidentally unleashed. I wondered if he even realized the weight of the call. Did he know he had just put me in a position where I could see everything? And more importantly, did he know I would never forget it? I wanted to talk to him, to ask what he thought he was doing, but I also knew I couldn't risk him letting something slip. Not yet. Meanwhile, my parents acted like nothing had happened. My mother kept inviting me to dinner, chatting about harmless things, smiling warmly, while my father carried on with his usual calm authority. But every time I was near them, I felt like I was walking on thin ice. One wrong word, one suspicious look, and I could blow everything open. Or worse, they could notice my suspicion and accelerate their plans. The tension was suffocating, and I couldn't escape it. I started keeping a small notebook, jotting down observations, phrases, behaviors, anything that seemed unusual. Even the smallest detail could be a clue. The way my aunt lingered near my father during conversations, the way my cousins sometimes whispered when they thought no one was looking, the way my mother avoided eye contact when certain topics came up. Every observation felt like a piece of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve, but couldn't ignore. And then there was the inheritance itself. Until that FaceTime, it had been a background idea for me, something distant and abstract. But now, it felt like a looming shadow. I realized that what they were planning wasn't just a theoretical conversation. It could change my life. The idea that my family could manipulate the situation, exclude me, and control what I was entitled to made my stomach twist. It wasn't just money. It was a symbol of trust, of fairness, of the life I had assumed would unfold naturally. And suddenly, that assumption was shattered. I began noticing patterns in how my family interacted. The way my father would glance at my mother when certain words were said, the way my cousins sometimes subtly reinforced his opinions, the way my aunt seemed to act like an observer but always inserted a comment that shifted the mood. They were coordinated, almost like a team, and I was the outsider who had accidentally walked into the play. That realization terrified me. I was no longer a passive participant. I was a potential disruptor. And I had to be careful. The subplot started to grow, too. My younger cousin, who I had always considered innocent, began showing signs of curiosity, asking questions that seemed harmless but were pointed, like he was trying to see what I knew. My brother, still unaware, continued his daily routine, but I began to notice him occasionally glancing at me, like he felt something had changed, though he didn't know what. And then there was the tension between my parents themselves, subtle arguments under the surface, eyes flashing in private, words half-spoken when they thought no one was listening. It was all connected, and I could feel the web tightening around me. One evening, I found myself in the kitchen while my mother was preparing dinner. I wanted to act casual, but my mind was racing. I asked a few harmless questions about family plans and finances, trying to feel her reactions, listening to the tone of her voice, the hesitation in her answers. Every little movement seemed loaded with meaning. She smiled at me, but there was a flicker, something almost imperceptible, like she knew I was thinking. I couldn't be sure, but it was enough to make me cautious. I also started thinking about possible allies. My brother, despite his obliviousness, was one. But I needed to find someone else I could trust, someone who wouldn't be swept into the plan or betray me. That thought made me consider the wider circle of relatives, even friends who sometimes visited. But trust was fragile, and the idea of confiding in the wrong person was terrifying. Every step had to be calculated. At night, I lay awake, imagining different scenarios. What if I confronted them directly? What if I tried to secretly gather evidence? What if I misinterpreted their intentions? Each thought brought a mix of fear and determination. I couldn't ignore what I had learned, but acting too soon could backfire. It was like a game of chess where I had seen the first move of the opponent, but I didn't yet understand the whole strategy. The tension reached a point where even small interactions felt charged. A casual comment about an upcoming family event could be a test. A shared laugh could hide a hidden agenda. I started analyzing every moment, every conversation, every subtle glance. The accidental FaceTime had opened my eyes to a side of my family I had never seen, and I couldn't unsee it. My life had quietly shifted into a world of secrets, whispers, and hidden plans, and I was trapped in the middle of it. And yet, there was a strange thrill in it too. Despite the fear, I felt a growing sense of control. The fact that I knew something they didn't gave me power, but it was dangerous power. I had to balance it carefully, using observation, patience, and strategy. Every day felt like a careful performance, pretending everything was normal while secretly watching, listening, and waiting. But then a new angle emerged. One day, while helping my mother with groceries, I overheard her on the phone. I tried not to eavesdrop, but the conversation caught my attention. Her voice was softer, more guarded. She mentioned a name I hadn't heard before, someone who was apparently involved in the plan, someone outside the immediate family. That realization made my mind spin. The web wasn't just within my household, it extended beyond, involving people I didn't even know. The stakes were higher than I had imagined. I realized that the accidental FaceTime had not only exposed a secret plan, it had started a chain reaction. Each day brought new discoveries, new angles, new pieces of the puzzle. The inheritance was no longer just about money. It was about control, manipulation, and trust. And I was at the center of it, trying to navigate a path through a labyrinth of deception I had never expected to face. Every day, the suspense grew. Every interaction carried weight. Every glance, every whisper, every laugh had a hidden meaning I had to decipher. And I knew, deep down, that this story wasn't going to resolve quickly. It was only getting started, and the longer I stayed silent, the more I learned, but also the greater the risk. One wrong move, one word spoken too soon, and everything could unravel. And that's when I realized, more clearly than ever, that I was no longer just an observer. I was a participant in a story of secrecy, strategy, and subtle betrayals. And the next move, whether I liked it or not, would determine the direction of everything. The days that followed felt like walking on a knife's edge. Every time I saw my family, every time I heard a laugh or a whisper, I felt like I was staring down a countdown I couldn't stop. The accidental FaceTime had put me in a position I never asked for, and now, every moment carried a weight I couldn't ignore. I had become hyper-aware, noticing the smallest details, trying to piece together the full picture before it was too late. It started with small observations. My father would glance at my mother in a way that seemed deliberate, almost signaling something to watch for. My cousins started acting more coordinated, almost rehearsed, as if every comment or joke was part of a larger plan. Even my younger relatives, who had always seemed innocent, began slipping hints, subtle questions about family matters, or glances that made me feel exposed. Each day, the tension grew thicker, and it was exhausting just to exist in that environment. I began strategizing, thinking about how I could turn this accidental knowledge into a way to protect myself without blowing my cover. Every time I considered speaking up, I imagined the consequences, the potential betrayal, the anger, the disappointment that could spiral out of control. I knew I had to watch, wait, and gather more information. But the longer I stayed quiet, the more dangerous it felt. They were planning something, and every moment of silence for me allowed their plan to unfold a little further. One afternoon, I noticed something strange. My brother, the accidental messenger of this chaos, had started acting differently. He was quieter, more cautious, glancing at me more often. I realized that even he must have sensed a shift, though he didn't know the full story. That gave me hope. Maybe he could be an ally when the time came. But I couldn't risk trusting him completely yet. The stakes were too high, and the web of deceit was too complex to risk even one slip. Then came the first major hint that their plan might be moving forward faster than I had imagined. While helping my mother with some paperwork, I noticed files, documents, and statements that were usually tucked away. They were out in the open, almost as if someone wanted them seen by the right or wrong person. My heart raced. Every shred of evidence, every hint of intent, told me that whatever I had stumbled onto wasn't just talk anymore, it was action. The tension in the house started to seep into everything. Meals were no longer casual. Conversations were measured. Even seemingly innocent events, like a family game night or a visit from relatives, carried hidden significance. I caught snippets of whispered words, glances exchanged over the table, hands brushing against papers that might hold more secrets than anyone knew. Every moment felt like I was balancing on the edge of a cliff, waiting for something to give. I began thinking about worst-case scenarios. What if I misread everything? What if I overreacted and blew my cover? The thought made my stomach churn. But the more I observed, the more I realized that this wasn't paranoia. There were real signals, real plans, and real danger. They were organized, coordinated, and patient. They had thought everything through, and now I was the one thrown into the middle of their strategy by accident. At night, I started imagining confrontations, the tension of potential fights, the fear of betrayal. I replayed the accidental FaceTime in my mind over and over, noticing things I had missed before. The slight smirk my father gave when he mentioned certain accounts, the almost imperceptible nod from my aunt, the quiet glance between cousins that said more than words ever could. Each memory was a piece of the puzzle, and it made me more certain that the climax of this story was approaching. I also started considering allies beyond my brother. Maybe a friend outside the family could help, someone impartial who could give advice or insight. But trust was tricky. One wrong word to the wrong person could trigger chaos, tip them off, and ruin any chance I had of protecting myself. I had to tread carefully, navigating a world where every interaction, every conversation, every look mattered. Then came the moment that made my blood run cold. I overheard part of a conversation while passing by the living room. My family was speaking in hushed tones, and I caught phrases that made my heart stop. It has to be done before she notices, and make sure nothing leaks. Those words confirmed my worst fears. This wasn't just idle discussion, it was a plan in motion, and I was dangerously close to becoming a target in their strategy. The days after that, the tension only grew. I found myself walking quietly through the house, listening for snippets of conversations, noticing behaviors I had overlooked. My parents, who had always seemed calm and reassuring, now seemed like actors in a play, each movement carefully calculated. My cousins were coordinated, smiling but with intent behind every glance. And my brother, poor kid, was somewhere in the middle, clueless, but connected in ways he didn't understand. Every encounter became a test. Even small, casual interactions felt charged. A simple question about the weather could hide a hidden meaning. A joke could be a signal. I had to weigh every word I said, every expression I showed. The house had become a battlefield of unspoken tensions, where knowledge was power and ignorance could be deadly. And the inheritance, the reason for all of this, loomed over everything. It wasn't just about money anymore. It had become a symbol of loyalty, control, and trust. Every move they made was tied to it, and every observation I made reminded me that my position was precarious. I had become part of the story, whether I wanted to be or not, and now I had to navigate it carefully to survive. The suspense reached a breaking point one evening. I noticed my parents whispering together in the hallway, glancing toward the rooms where my cousins were playing. Their conversation was brief, but intense, their faces serious, their voices low. The words I caught sent a shiver down my spine. She's noticing things, and we need to move faster. That was it. I realized they had sensed a shift, that my accidental knowledge might already be affecting their plans. I felt the stakes rise higher than ever. Every day, every hour, every minute felt like a countdown to something I couldn't fully anticipate. I had to stay alert, stay careful, and stay one step ahead, even as the tension in the house became almost unbearable. The web of secrecy, manipulation, and hidden intentions was tightening around me, and I could feel the pressure building toward a climax that would change everything. Even my brother, the accidental catalyst of this chaos, was starting to act differently. He asked questions that seemed casual but carried hidden curiosity, glanced at me in ways that suggested he suspected something, and yet remained blissfully unaware of the full story. His innocence was both a comfort and a risk. I knew that if he slipped, even slightly, the entire house of secrets could collapse. I realized that I was now at a crossroads. Every observation, every interaction, every piece of evidence I gathered could determine what happened next. The tension had reached its peak, and the story was building toward a moment I could feel in my bones. The accidental FaceTime had opened a door I could never close, and now the climax of the family drama was approaching faster than I could prepare for. The days, the whispers, the glances, the hidden plans, they all pointed to one thing. Something was about to happen, and it was going to be intense. The suspense was unbearable, and I knew that when the next move came, nothing would be the same again. Every second counted. Every word mattered. And the moment I had been waiting for, the moment where everything could unravel or explode, was closer than ever. Just when I thought I had a handle on the tension in the house, something happened that made me realize the web of secrets was even bigger than I imagined. It was late one evening, and I had stayed up pretending to work on homework, listening for anything unusual. That's when I saw it, a text message pop up on my brother's phone, one that he hadn't noticed yet. Curiosity got the better of me, and I leaned closer just enough to catch a glimpse. My heart nearly stopped. The message wasn't from anyone in the house. It was from someone I didn't recognize, and the words made my stomach twist. Everything is set. Make sure she doesn't suspect a thing. I froze, my mind racing. Someone outside the family was involved. That meant this wasn't just a plan among parents and cousins anymore. There was a new player in the game, someone who could tip the balance, manipulate information, and potentially escalate the situation even further. Suddenly, everything I thought I knew about what was happening felt fragile. My family's plan had layers, and I had only seen the surface. I couldn't confront my brother about it. He was still oblivious to the depth of what was going on, and the last thing I wanted was for him to accidentally reveal what I had learned. I had to keep quiet, keep observing, and try to figure out who this mysterious person was. My mind kept flashing back to the accidental FaceTime, the one moment that had put me in this position. I realized how dangerous that moment had been. It wasn't just a glimpse into my family's plan. It was a doorway into a much bigger scheme I hadn't expected. The next day, I noticed subtle changes in my family's behavior. My parents seemed more guarded, their smiles a little tighter, their conversations just a little quieter. My cousins were more coordinated, almost rehearsed, as if they knew something new was in motion. Even my brother seemed slightly more distracted, glancing at his phone more than usual. Every detail felt like a clue, a sign that the plan had shifted or that new instructions had arrived. I felt the walls closing in, and the tension in the house was suffocating. I started retracing the conversations from the accidental FaceTime, trying to pick up any hint that could connect to the mysterious message. My father had mentioned timing several times, my mother had referenced making sure nothing leaks, and now this unknown person was telling someone to ensure she doesn't suspect a thing. It all connected, but I still didn't know how. My heart pounded as I realized I was not just a witness anymore. I was a target, and my next moves would be crucial. Then came another shock. While helping my mother clean up after dinner, I overheard her on the phone again. This time, the conversation was sharper, more urgent. She mentioned my name explicitly and said, "We need to keep her busy and distracted. She's noticing more than we thought." My stomach dropped. They were aware that I knew something, or at least that I was suspicious. That meant I had to be even more careful. I couldn't misstep. One wrong move could expose me completely, and I wasn't ready for that yet. I realized the stakes had skyrocketed. The plan wasn't just about inheritance anymore, it was about control, manipulation, and secrecy on a level I hadn't anticipated. The mysterious external person added another layer of danger. Whoever they were coordinating with my family, and that meant they could influence events in ways I couldn't see coming. The tension was unbearable, and I could feel it building toward a breaking point. The following days, I started noticing patterns that I hadn't before. Certain family members seemed to be moving in tandem, like gears in a machine. Small actions, like placing a dish in a specific spot or dropping a casual remark, suddenly seemed calculated. My parents exchanged glances when I walked by, and my cousins were suddenly careful about where they left their phones. It was clear now that everything was being orchestrated, and I was in the center of a plan that was far more complex than I had imagined. Even my brother, the one person I had thought I could trust, was unknowingly part of the larger scheme. He had always been a link between me and the rest of the family, often innocently sharing news or updates. But now, with this external player involved, his actions could have consequences he didn't understand. I had to consider how to navigate his presence carefully, using him without putting him at risk, or tipping off the family that I knew too much. I also realized that this second twist, the external person, meant that my family's confidence might be higher than I expected. They weren't just planning within the household anymore. They had resources, allies, and strategies I couldn't anticipate. That made me nervous, but it also sparked determination. I couldn't just wait for them to act. I had to find a way to gather more information, understand the full scope of their plan, and prepare for whatever came next. That night, lying in bed, I thought about all the possibilities. Who could the mysterious person be? How long had they been involved? Were they trustworthy, or were they someone playing their own game? And most importantly, what was going to happen if I made the wrong move? The tension was unbearable, and the sense of impending climax was palpable. I knew that at any moment, something could happen to change everything. The next morning, the house felt different. There was a quiet undercurrent in every interaction, a subtle urgency I hadn't noticed before. My parents seemed sharper, more focused, and even my cousins moved with purpose. It was as if the plan had accelerated, and the mysterious external player had already set something in motion. I realized I was running out of time. Every observation, every careful step I took mattered more than ever. I decided to start keeping track of movements and conversations more rigorously. Every whispered word, every glance exchanged, every phone call could hold the key to understanding the full plan. The second plot twist had escalated everything. The inheritance, the family dynamics, and my own position in this story were now tangled with an outside force. The tension had reached a fever pitch, and I could feel the climax approaching like a storm on the horizon. And just when I thought I had prepared for everything, my brother casually mentioned something over breakfast that made my blood run cold. "I think someone's been asking about you lately, asking too many questions." His words were innocent, but they carried an unintentional warning. The plan was moving faster than I realized, and I had no idea who else might be watching, listening, or manipulating the situation behind the scenes. I could feel the walls of secrecy closing in, the stakes higher than ever. The accidental FaceTime had revealed one layer of the plan, but now I was staring at a second, more dangerous layer that I hadn't anticipated. Every glance, every whisper, every secret conversation could bring me closer to disaster, or give me the insight I needed to survive. The tension was unbearable, the stakes higher than ever, and I knew that the next few days would determine everything. I was trapped in a game of observation and strategy, with my family as one player, the mysterious external person as another, and me as the wild card in the middle. Every choice I made would matter. Every second counted. And I had no idea what would happen next, but I knew one thing for certain. Nothing would ever be the same again. The tension had finally reached its breaking point. That night, I couldn't sleep, pacing around my room while trying to piece together everything I had observed: the accidental FaceTime, the whispers about inheritance, the secret plans, and the mysterious external person. My mind was racing with scenarios, strategies, and worst-case possibilities. I knew I couldn't wait any longer. Something had to happen. I had to confront the situation, or the plan would move forward without me, leaving me powerless. I decided to act during the family dinner the next evening. The house was buzzing with casual chatter, but I could feel the underlying tension in every glance and half-smile. My father and mother were unusually formal, as if bracing themselves for something, and my cousins were more coordinated than ever, their whispers barely hidden. I took a deep breath and joined them at the table, determined to maintain a calm exterior while staying alert. The conversation started innocently, about school, work, and daily life, but I noticed the subtle signals immediately. My father's hand brushed against a stack of papers, my mother kept glancing toward my cousins, and my aunt was unusually quiet, almost waiting. I realized this was it, the moment when the plan might be set into motion. I had to act, and I had to be careful. I waited until dessert, when everyone's attention was slightly distracted. That was when I spoke, my voice steady but deliberate. I think we need to talk about something important, something that's been happening behind my back. The room went silent. Forks paused midair, eyes widened, and a chill seemed to settle over the table. I could feel the tension radiating from every corner of the room. My father's eyes narrowed. "What are you talking about?" he asked, his voice calm but laced with suspicion. I glanced around, making sure I had everyone's attention. "I know about the inheritance discussions," I said quietly, watching reactions carefully. "I know some plans have been made without me, and I've been keeping track of everything. I want to understand why." There was a pause, and then my mother spoke, her voice soft but sharp. "We only wanted what we thought was best for you," she said, though her eyes betrayed tension. "We didn't want to hurt you, just manipulate me." I cut in, my heart racing. I heard everything, and I know this isn't just about money. It's about control and secrecy. And now I need to know the truth. My cousins exchanged nervous glances, and even my brother shifted in his seat, unsure of what to say. The room felt like it was collapsing inward, the air thick with suspense. Then my father finally leaned back and sighed. "Maybe it's time you knew the full story," he said, and my pulse quickened. He explained that the inheritance wasn't just a simple matter of money. It was tied to family assets, long-term investments, and even some legal stipulations that had required careful handling. They had worried that if I acted impulsively or didn't fully understand, things could go wrong. The mysterious external person? It turned out they were a family attorney, someone tasked with guiding the process, not manipulating it. For a moment, relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. As my father continued, I realized that while the intentions weren't malicious, the secrecy had escalated the tension to a dangerous point. They had underestimated how much I would notice, how sensitive I was to subtle behaviors, and how much the accidental FaceTime had thrown their plan into chaos. Then came the final twist. Just as I was starting to process this revelation, my brother, still looking confused, said quietly, "There's something you all don't know. I accidentally sent some of the documents to my friend yesterday, thinking it was just a backup. She's seen everything." The room froze. My father's face went pale. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Even my cousins looked stunned. I realized that the accidental chain of events, the FaceTime, my observations, and now my brother's unintended action, had exposed everything outside the family. The inheritance, the plans, the timing, even the external attorney's instructions were now at risk of being revealed. I looked at my brother, then back at my parents, and a strange mix of fear and empowerment coursed through me. The secrets that had seemed untouchable were suddenly vulnerable, and the tension that had built for weeks reached a fever pitch. I had been pushed to the edge, forced to observe, analyze, and act, and now the consequences of all these actions were about to unfold in ways none of us could predict. The room was silent except for the faint hum of the ceiling fan. My parents and cousins realized that control had shifted. They hadn't accounted for me noticing, for me acting, or for my brother's innocent mistake. I felt a quiet sense of authority for the first time, knowing that the accidental FaceTime had given me insight they could no longer hide from. But even as the tension settled into a fragile truce, I couldn't ignore the feeling that the story wasn't over. The final twist, the documents potentially in the hands of someone outside the family, meant that the stakes had changed entirely. What would happen if the information spread? How would my family react if their plans were exposed? And what would I do next? For the first time in weeks, I realized I wasn't just an observer anymore. I had become a player, someone whose decisions could alter the course of a story. The climax had arrived, but the real consequences, the ripple effects, the next moves, and the hidden responses were still waiting to unfold. And just when I thought I could finally breathe, my brother looked at me with wide eyes and said, "I don't know if this is good or bad, but she's already talking to someone about it." The room went completely silent again, a new wave of suspense settling over us. The accidental FaceTime, the whispered plans, the external player, and now this. Everything was spiraling in a direction none of us had anticipated. And I knew one thing with absolute certainty. The story was far from over. After the shock of my brother's accidental revelation, the house fell into a heavy, almost tangible silence. Everyone seemed frozen, unsure of what to say or do next. For a moment, I just sat there, letting it sink in. The accidental FaceTime, the whispered plans, the involvement of the family attorney, and now this new complication. All of it had brought everything to the surface. It was chaotic, but somehow, finally, it was out in the open. My parents exchanged a look that spoke more than words could. I realized then that they hadn't been trying to hurt me. They had been trying to protect me in their own way, though the secrecy and manipulation had made it impossible to trust their intentions. My father finally spoke, his voice calm but full of weight. "We didn't expect you to notice, and we certainly didn't anticipate this chain of events. But maybe this is a chance to start fresh, honestly, without hiding anything." I took a deep breath, my own emotions twisting between relief, anger, and understanding. "I just needed to know the truth," I said quietly. "Not the parts you thought I should see, not the secrets I wasn't supposed to know. The whole truth." My mother nodded, a tear glinting in her eye. "You deserve that," she whispered. "All of it." The tension in the room began to soften just a little, and I could see that everyone was feeling the weight of weeks of hidden plans. My cousins, usually so competitive and guarded, seemed relieved that the mystery was finally out in the open. Even my brother looked like he had carried a heavy burden without realizing it. Once the initial shock passed, the conversations began. My parents explained the details of the inheritance, the legal steps that had been taken, and why they had been so secretive. It was complicated, with accounts, properties, and investments tied together in ways I hadn't fully understood before. They had feared that revealing too much too soon could create confusion, arguments, or mistakes that might jeopardize everything. I listened carefully, asking questions when needed, taking mental notes, and watching my family's reactions. Each answer revealed a little more about their intentions and their fears. The more I understood, the more I realized that while their approach had been flawed, their goal had never been to harm me. It was just a lesson in how secrecy, even with the best intentions, can create chaos. My cousins began to share their side as well. The whispered plans I had overheard weren't just about excluding me. They were about figuring out how to handle complicated family assets without creating conflict. They had been practicing, coordinating, and even consulting with the attorney to make sure nothing went wrong. In their minds, it was a plan of precaution, though in reality, it had created the opposite effect. I felt a mix of emotions, anger, frustration, but also understanding. I realized that sometimes people try so hard to protect those they love that they forget trust and communication are just as important. secrets, even when intended to help, can become a source of tension, fear, and misunderstanding. That was the biggest lesson of all. Once we had talked through everything, I suggested a new approach. We need transparency, I said. If something is important, we talk about it openly. No more whispers, no more accidental FaceTimes revealing secrets, and definitely no outside surprises. My family agreed. It was a simple solution, but it felt like a breakthrough. The energy in the room shifted from tension and fear to cautious relief. The attorney, who had been quietly observing, spoke next. Now that everyone is aware and on the same page, we can proceed carefully, legally, and fairly. This situation could have gotten messy, but it's salvageable now that honesty is in play. I nodded, realizing that even the external players could be allies once transparency was established. Over the next few days, the family slowly began rebuilding trust. We reviewed the inheritance documents together, discussed the legal processes, and clarified everyone's roles and expectations. What had once felt like a source of manipulation became a series of lessons in responsibility, communication, and patience. Even my brother, who had inadvertently triggered the chain of events, learned how his actions could have serious consequences and how important it was to be aware. The accidental FaceTime that had started everything became a story we laughed about eventually, though with caution. It had been a wake-up call for everyone, revealing how fragile trust could be and how quickly misunderstandings could escalate. My family learned that assumptions, secrecy, and lack of communication were dangerous, even when intentions were good. Looking back, I realized the story had several layers. There was the inheritance itself, the legal and financial complications, and the external attorney's involvement. But the deeper conflicts were about trust, family dynamics, and understanding each other's intentions. All the arguments, secret plans, and whispered words had been symptoms of a deeper need to ensure that love and care didn't get lost in the chaos. I also reflected on my own role. The accidental FaceTime had forced me to pay attention, to observe, and to act. It had taught me the value of patience, critical thinking, and careful communication. I had been pushed into a position where I had to navigate family secrets, strategy, and hidden intentions, and I had learned that even in the most complicated situations, honesty and clarity were the best tools to move forward. In the end, the inheritance was divided fairly, with everyone understanding the rationale behind each decision. My family agreed to handle things openly from now on, checking in with each other before taking steps that could affect one another. Even the external attorney continued to guide us, now with full transparency, ensuring there were no hidden surprises. The tension that had felt unbearable just weeks before finally began to dissipate. And yet, as I looked around at my family during one quiet evening together, I realized that life would never be entirely without surprises. People make mistakes, misunderstandings happen, and secrets can emerge in unexpected ways. But the difference now was that we had learned to handle those situations together, with honesty and communication as our guides. My brother leaned over and whispered, "Next time, maybe don't answer a FaceTime during family meetings." We both laughed, though it was a nervous, knowing kind of laugh. It was a reminder that while the chaos had passed, the lessons remained. Accidents happen, tensions rise, and secrets can unravel, but how we respond makes all the difference. I felt a quiet sense of closure. The major conflicts were resolved, the misunderstandings cleared, and the family had begun rebuilding trust. But the story also left a lingering awareness. Life, even in the safest spaces, can hold surprises, twists, and moments of tension that test relationships. What mattered most was how we chose to navigate those moments. In the end, the accidental FaceTime, the hidden plans, and the external interference had all led to growth, understanding, and a stronger sense of family. Secrets no longer had the power to divide us because we had learned the importance of openness. The tension that had haunted us became a lesson etched into memory, a story that would shape how we communicated, trusted, and supported each other in the future. And as I lay in bed that night, thinking about everything that had happened, I realized something important. Even in the most unexpected moments, like a random, accidental FaceTime, You can learn the truth, confront challenges, and turn chaos into clarity. Life is unpredictable, but family, honesty, and understanding can be the anchors that help you navigate even the stormiest waters. For the first time in weeks, I could breathe. The suspense, the fear, and the tension had finally given way to clarity. The inheritance was settled, trust was restored, and the lessons learned would stay with me forever. But the memory of that accidental FaceTime, the whispering plans, and the near misses would always remind me to pay attention, trust my instincts, and never underestimate the impact of one unexpected moment. And as the house finally settled into quiet, I knew that while this chapter had ended, life would always bring new surprises. But now, I was ready to face them, not as a passive observer, but as someone who had learned to navigate even the most complicated situations with patience, awareness, and honesty.